Hi, and welcome to my channel, Melody Joy Quilts. Today, I'm going to be making a free pattern from Jordan Fabrics. The name of the pattern is called Abundance. I am using some fat quarters. These are purples and pinks, batiks. I got these at Joann's before Joann's closed. So the first thing I'm going to do is iron up all of my fabric. This is a super easy pattern. The main patchwork only has one size cut. You're going to cut all of your fabric except for the fabric for the borders. The fabric for the main part of the quilt is all going to be cut into 8-inch squares, your lights and your darks. And you need equal amounts because we're going to be using those 8-inch squares to make half square triangles. If you don't have a rotating cutting board, just turn your mat. And again, we're just cutting 8-inch squares. Once you've finished cutting all of your 8-inch squares, you need to pair your fabrics up. Each dark needs to go with a light square. You're going to take your light squares and draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. Now, these are batiks, and it's a little bit hard to find which is the right side and which is the wrong side of the fabric because batiks the print shows on both sides. So just whatever is the wrong side of your fabric, go ahead and draw that diagonal line from corner to corner. You don't need to mark the dark fabrics, only the lights. The next step is to take one of your dark pieces of fabric, put it right side up, take one of your marked fabrics that you drew the diagonal line on, lay it on top. You're then going to sew a 1/4 inch seam away, not on the line, but a 1/4 inch away from the line down either side. And you're going to repeat this with all your pairs of fabric. So each of your dark squares should have a light square with a diagonal line, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam away from either side of your drawn line. You can get into a really nice rhythm with chain piecing because you're going to sew them all the exact same way. When you finish sewing both seams, you're going to lay it back on your cutting mat with your long ruler, and you're going to line the edge of the ruler up exactly on the line, and you're going to cut down that line. When you open it, you now have a nice big half square triangle. This quilt comes together super quickly because you're working with really large pieces. Your half square triangles should come out to just over 7.5 inches. I believe it comes out to 7 5/8 inches, and you will need to trim off those little dog ears. The next step is to iron them open, and I just ironed all of mine with the seam towards the dark side. It's really easy to make your seam go to the dark side. If you lay it down with the dark fabric up, set the seam, then you peel that piece open, and then when you iron, the seam naturally wants to go to whichever side was on top, because when you open it and you press it over, the seam is underneath that dark side. Here I'm just snipping off those little dog ears, and then I'm going to make my piles of my different colors of pears. And I'm checking the size, but it came out pretty much accurate, so I didn't feel like I had to do much trimming up. Just continue sewing your sets of fabric together, chain piecing as you go, 1/4 inch seam away from that drawn line until you finish sewing all of your pairs together. Chain piecing is so satisfying. Look at this whole long chain of pieces. I probably should have cut all of my fabrics before I started, but I tend to just work in batches, and so I had cut one pair of darks and lights and sewn all of those, and then I went to the next set and cut those. And so this was my method. You could cut everything before you start, or you could cut as you go. Either way, everything needs to be cut in 8-inch squares. Measure twice, cut once. I almost cut that on the 7-inch line instead of the 8-inch line, but I double checked myself and realized, yep, that was 7 inches, not 8. So measure twice, cut once. Once you have all of your half square triangles completely sewn and ironed, the next step is to lay your quilt out. And so I've decided on my layout. I have 8 blocks by 8 blocks. And the way I've decided to actually sew it together is to take 4 individual blocks to my sewing machine at a time and just sew these 4 blocks together. And then once I have this whole quadrant done, I'm going to sew this block to this block and this larger block to this larger block and then sew these together. So I'll go this quadrant and then I'll go up here and do this one and then over here and then down here. And that way, instead of taking a whole row over to my sewing machine and trying to keep it straight, I'm just gonna do a small section at a time. Now I have a piece that's like this big, and you can see I have a hole on my design wall where it's gonna go. And so I'm just choosing to split it up in this way to make it more manageable for me. Now I have 2 sections like this done. So I made a 4 patch and a 4 patch and sewed it into an 8 patch and another 8 patch. And then I'm gonna sew these together. And again, that's where it goes on the design wall. I'm working in quadrants. I think this is a good way to split it up instead of doing just long, long rows. And then I can just match up individually these smaller sections. I definitely found it easier to do it in quadrants. And so here I took 4 blocks off my design wall to the sewing machine, and I worked on this quilt 4 blocks at a time. And the block is just that half square triangle. And so once you make all of those half square triangles, then you just play around with the layout until you're happy with how it's looking. The pattern has a suggested layout. I was very similar to that, but I ended up switching colors around until I was happy. And I liked mine to have really high contrast, but you can make it however you want with the layout. Half square triangles are a great basic building block of so many quilts. This one has a really cool diamond center, and then it works like in spirals out from the diamond in the middle. So here you can really see my layout and also how I split this quilt up into quadrants to work on it a section at a time. This prevented me from having to do any super long rows of sewing, which just makes a lot of less points you have to match up. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. There is just so much you can do, even with a very basic block like a half square triangle. In this case, the high contrast colors and the layout is what create the really fun diamond shape. And I'm gonna put a link in the description below to the free pattern. Happy quilting!